Hey, it's Matt, your average gamer, and for this video, we're going to be going over 9 more fun and powerful builds in Elden Ring. These are mostly build requests from you guys in the comment section in the previous videos. Hopefully, I was able to turn many of these into powerful builds. Let's jump right in. And for the first one, we have the Death Knight's Twin Axes from the DLC. A lot of people are looking forward to this one. This is a little difficult to build around this one. Now, its Ash of War can build up on successive hits. However, the scaling is relatively weird. The Ash of War scales much like the weapon itself, but it scales with faith, strength, and even dexterity to a degree, which makes it pretty much one of the ultimate quality weapons and a little challenging to do at rune level 150. Yeah, this weapon is strange on the Ash of War. Unlike the regular hits with the weapon, which seem to be mainly strength and faith, the Ash of War has dexterity scaling to a degree, which I tested with various different stat spreads, and higher dexterity seems to do a lot for the Ash of War. We have the Death Knight's Twin Axis, plus 10 preferably. We have the Gravelstone Seal Rakshasa set on. We have Millicent's Prosthesis. We have the Ritual Swords Talisman. We have the Lightning Scorpion Charm. We have the Shard of Alexander. And then we have the Lightning tier, Dexterity tier to boost our dexterity a little bit here by 10 levels. Let's jump into stats. So our stat spread here to make the most out of the Ash of War, which can build up on successive hits, is 60 Vigor, 20 Mind, 26 Endurance, 50 Strength, 30 Dexterity with the Dexterity tier, 40 Faith, and then we're using Golden Vow, Halash Shabiri, and Knight's Lightning Spear goes really well with this build. And the next one on this list is the Erdsteel Dagger. This is another build request. This is a pretty amazing weapon for Faith builds because it has excellent Faith scaling, and for a Dagger, you can actually get around 600 AR if you use the Sacred Blade Ash of War with this weapon. Now, you will see me get beat up when I use daggers a little bit because the hitboxes aren't phenomenal for them. They're a little bit difficult to deal with because they're not always going to land. But with that said, with the Erdsteel Dagger, and I have a regular dagger in my offhand with Sacred Blade as well, we're able to get in a lot of damage when you do make contact with the weapons. And it adds up to a surprising amount. You really do get a lot out of these. And if I had a second one, I believe you can get 2 per playthrough if you do the quest line for it. I believe there's a quest line to get a second one. I only ended up with 1 in a regular dagger. If you have 2, you're going to get even more damage out of this build. I don't do dagger builds often, but I would recommend this one. I really love the Faith scaling. And the fact that you get such great Faith scaling on a really light weapon too could fit a lot of Faith builds if you want to mix in different incantations and things that you could add to the build. In a second, we're going to go over equipment, stats, everything you need to know. And we have the Sacred Erdsteel Dagger, preferably plus 25. Sacred Dagger, plus 25. Same Ash of War. We have the Erdtree Seal, part of the Rakshasa set on. You don't need the Grey Bird Armor, Melissa's Prosthesis, Shard of Alexander, Wingsword Insignia or Rotten Wingsword Insignia, Sacred Scorpion Charm. We have the Holy tier, Thorny tier. Let's jump into stats. And for stats, we have 60 Vigor, 21 Mind, 26 Endurance, 14 Strength, we have 20 Dexterity, we have 75 Faith, so we got a good amount of Faith for this build. We hit 51 Poise, we are using Golden Vow, Halash Shabiri, and then any Holy Incantations would be perfect for this build. Next one up, somebody asked me for a Rapier build that didn't use the Anspear Rapiers. For this, we used 1 Rozier's Rapier and 1 other regular Rapier, and we have 1 with Spinning Weapon in Cold Affinity, and then the other one has the Glintstone Pebble Ash of War for some range, and it turns into, well, this is really not a bad build at all. It actually works really well. It's incredibly convenient. Glintstone Pebble Ash of War is actually not bad at all. I haven't used it that often. I mean, yeah, it doesn't have the range of regular Glintstone Pebble, but it still has a good amount of damage, and it can be really convenient for backing up and being kind of a partial intelligence build where you run like a Dex intelligence build. Yeah, it works really well. Better than I would have expected. Decent damage on it. And then, of course, you can go for the successive hits on the Rapiers, build up Frost, and then use Spinning Weapon in the other one. The second here, we're going to jump into equipment, stats, everything you need to know for this build. And we have Rozier's Cold Rapier with Glintstone Pebble on it. We have a Cold Rapier with Spinning Weapon. We have any seal for buffs. We have part of the Rakshasa set on. You could use the whole set for 8% more damage. We have Millicent's Prosthesis. We have the Shard of Alexander. We have Wingsword Insignia or Rotten Wingsword Insignia if you have it. Magic Scorpion Charm, Magic tier, Thorny tier, and then we're using Market Shackle there to stun the boss. Let's jump into stats. And for stats, we have 60 Vigor, 20 Mind, 26 Endurance, 14 Strength. We have 50 Dexterity, and we have 30 Intelligence. We have 25 Faith, and then we are using Golden Vow and Flame Grant Me Strength. Now, if you have the Faith for it, technically speaking, Halashiburi is better, and I did change the pants that I had on for this build to add some additional armor, but Rakshasa set gives you 8% more in total. And next up here, we have a random build, and that's Freja's Bloodhound build. This is a really cool one to kind of mix around and use, especially if you use Savage Lion's Claw on Freja's Greatsword and then combine it with Bloodhound's Fang. It turns into a really powerful build where you get 2 amazing Ashes of War. And you get a lot of jump attack damage. They have a dual moveset, which is amazing. You could switch to either Ash of War and take advantage of both. They both do good posture damage too, so you can get a lot of breaks with a build like this one, but mainly going for jump attacks. And of course, always having Bloodhound's Fang on hand is pretty awesome. And then of course, we're running Freja's Greatsword in quality affinity to take advantage of the scaling of both, since Bloodhound's Fang is a little bit quality, even though it leans Dex a little bit more. Second here, we're going to go over equipment, stats, everything you need to know for this powerful build. Alright, let's go into equipment now. We have Freja's Quality Greatsword plus 25 with Savage Lion's Claw. We have Bloodhound's Fang, any seal for buffs. We have the Gravebird set on, part of Rakshasa set, Arsenal Charm plus 1 or Great Jar's Arsenal, Shard of Alexander, Ritual Swords Talisman, Claw Talisman, Green Burst Crystal tier, Faith tier. Let's jump into stats. And we have 60 Vigor, 18 Mind, 29 Endurance, 54 Strength. If you two-hand either one, you'll have over 80. 35 Dexterity, 25 Faith. And then for our buffs, we're going to be using Golden Vow and Flame Grant Me Strength. And of course, we hit 51 poise with this build. And the next one up here we have is Sunflower for the win. And I did a build for this weapon, I believe, over the summer. A couple people asked me for another one because they really like it as a strength faith weapon. It's pretty good. We're going to showcase it here a bit, and I'm going to talk about it. I don't think it's super OP, but it does a decent amount of damage, a good amount of posture damage, and of course it has really good faith scaling too. It's mainly a bonk weapon, though. Of course, you're going to focus on strength as your secondary stat. That's going to be your second stat. Your main stat should be faith, but you're going to need a decent amount of strength to run this weapon, too. The Ash of War is kind of like a better version of the charged attack. If you do the charged attack, it's a little bit like the Ash of War, and then the Ash of War kind of extends upon that a little bit. So it's not one of the most powerful Ashes of War you're going to use in Elden Ring, but if you hit or land all of it, it does a ton of poise damage in total. And of course, the DLC has a lot of bosses that are weak to holy damage, so you're going to get a lot of holy damage out of this weapon as well. Yeah, the Ash of War definitely could be better for sure. I guess is what I was trying to get at, because ultimately it ends up being an extended version of the charge attack. But with that said, it does build up a lot of holy damage. It has a little bit of an AoE with it that kind of adds on to it. And then, of course, having that good amount of holy damage and having a bonk weapon isn't bad for DLC either. This probably isn't going to be one of the better weapons for the late game stretch of the regular game, but you could certainly use it in DLC and have a good amount of damage with the weapon, and honestly probably have a great time too with this bonk Sunflower weapon. If you haven't tried this out and you're a fan of my channel and you like faith builds like I do, try this weapon out, because I do believe that ultimately you will end up loving it, at least to use it for a little while. It's definitely worth using a larval tier on, no question, and you'll end up having a really great time with it. There's the AoE there on the Ash of War. It does add a little bit of holy damage. Jump into equipment. And we have the Shadow Sunflower weapon, of course, plus 10 preferably. We have the Erdsteel. We have Rakshasa set on, Shard of Alexander, Sacred Scorpion Charm. We have the Axe Talisman because the charge attacks are good. Two-handed Sword Talisman, Holy tier, Spike Crack tier. Let's jump into stats. And we have 60 Vigor, 19 Mind, 31 Endurance, 26 Strength. That's going to be nearly 40 when you two-hand this. We have 15 Dexterity, 60 Faith for this weapon. We're using Golden Vow, Halashiburi, Blessings of Erdtree, and Multi-Layered Ring of Light. And next up here, we have a build for heavy thrusting swords, because people have always asked me about these. So I finally did one with 2 of the Godsend Stitchers, one with Stormblade on it, and the other one's going to have Impaling Thrust. It actually ends up being a really good combination. And of course, we're using these in Blood Affinity to get a decent amount of bleed build up as well. Yeah, these really aren't that bad at all. I honestly did not like heavy thrusting weapons, and then I used these two. I tried several different Ashes of War out on both, ended up finding a combination that I liked, and ultimately ended up liking them in the end. Yeah, they're a little slow for PvE, and they're kind of an awkward class. They're definitely better in PvP than they are PvE, but they are usable. You could definitely make good builds with them, and they have decent range on things like Impaling Thrust. They have a good dual move set. And of course, you get a decent amount of damage out of them as well, because they have decent AR too. And you get a good amount of bleed build up too, around 130, so it's no slouch there. The fact that you could put Stormblade on one of these is awesome. Gives you a ranged option, and then a Paling Thrust on the other gives you an option to break posture. And then, of course, using the dual moveset, build up on bleed and successive hits, decent amount too, even though they're a little bit slower because they're bigger weapons. We have 2 Blood Godskin Stitchers, one with Stormblade, one with Impaling Thrust. We have the White Mask and Rakshasa set on. We have Shard of Alexander, Enraged Divine Beast Talisman, Lord of Blood's Exaltation, Millicent's Prosthesis. We have the Thorny tier, Faith tier, and we were using Moog Shackle to stun the boss there. You could use any seal, of course, for buffs. Let's jump into stats. For those that don't know, buffs are the same across all seals, so you could use any seal you have the requirements for buffs. We have 60 Vigor, 15 Mind, 25 Endurance, 20 Strength, 45 Dexterity, 25 Faith, 45 Arcane for that Arcane Soft Cap. We hit over 51 Poise, and we were using Golden Vow and Flame Grant Me Strength to buff this build. And next up on here, we have a build for the Bastard's Greatsword, and this is going to use the Ghostflame Ash of War. Now, this isn't as good as the Death's Poker version for some reason. I still believe this Ash needs a buff. However, it can end up being really good when you combine it with a really good weapon like the Bastard's Greatsword, which has a really good moveset and combos well with the Ash of War. Ultimately, an amazing combination. A couple people are looking for builds for the Bastard's Greatsword. Keep in mind, I mentioned this in my last video, the Iron Greatsword, if you have the patience to farm for it, is just a little bit better in about every category than the Bastard's Greatsword. But if you do not have the patience to farm for the Iron Greatsword, the Bastard's Greatsword is an excellent replacement and a weapon you can get relatively early too. In a second here, we're going to go over equipment after we take this Tree Sentinel down, stats, everything you need to know for this build. This is definitely one worth trying out. If you haven't found a weapon you could use with that Ash of War from the DLC, this is a really good weapon to use that has good scaling and cold affinity. We have the Cold Bastard Sword plus 25 preferably with Ghostflame Ignition, Ash of War, any seal for buffs. We have the Rakshasa set. White Mask we had on by mistake. I'll explain that when we go over stats. I'm going to use the full Rakshasa set here. And then we have the Shard of Alexander, Magic Scorpion Charm, Ritual Swords Talisman. We have the Two-Handed Sword Talisman for our regular hits, Magic tier, Faith tier. Let's jump into stats. And now we're going to go over this one, and we have 60 Vigor, 17 Mind, 25 Endurance, 20 Strength, 15 Dexterity, 60 Intelligence, because the Ash scales entirely with your Intelligence stat, 33 Faith with the Faith tier, so we can run Golden Vow and Hellish Rebury. So I had the White Mask because I was proccing Lord of Bloods and White Mask to try to get more damage out of the Ash of War, but ultimately it didn't end up being worth it, and a more well-rounded build ended up being better, mixing in the sword with the Ash of War. And next up, we have a build for the Warped Axe. Now, the Warped Axe is an incredible weapon that for some reason, I don't even think I've ever made a build for, which really is a crime against Elden Ring itself, because it's just so good in so many affinities. This weapon, honestly, is incredible. You can get a ton of damage out of the charge attacks. It's excellent in cold affinity. If you want to run it as a bleed build and blood affinity, it's good too. Charge attacks are amazing in terms of poise damage. Strength scaling is excellent on this. Yeah, I can't believe I never made a build for this weapon because it's honestly incredible. Of the axe category, this truly is just absolutely so good in terms of its scaling, how much damage you can get out of it, how it does in different affinities. Now, I do want to talk about one thing. The original person that requested this build, they wanted me to focus on like the chain combos and stuff, which I will do in another build in the future, probably a week from now or so, where that'll focus more on successive hits. Because you could chain R1 and R2 combos. A lot of people were looking for that, so I'll do that in the next one. I didn't see that in the comments when I was going over build requests and stuff like that, and the charge attacks are still absolutely best on this weapon and honestly what I'd recommend more than anything else, highly recommended. However, if you do make a build for chaining R1 and R2 combos, combining successive hits with charge attacks and things like the Two-Handed Sword Talisman, you'll end up with a lot of damage too, because it has some really awesome combos between the two. We're going to jump into equipment here in a second. Stats, everything you need to know for a really powerful Warped Axe build. And we have the Warped Axe in cold affinity, plus 25 preferably Royal Knight's Resolve, any seal for buffs. We have the Rakshasa set on. We have the Axe Talisman. We have the Dagger Talisman. We have the Blade of Mercy Talisman, Two-Handed Sword Talisman, Spike Crack tier, Blood-Sucking Crack tier to make this even more powerful. Let's jump into stats. And we have 60 Vigor, 20 Mind, 26 Endurance, 54 Strength. That's going to be 80 when you two-hand this. We have 20 Intelligence as well, 25 Faith with the Faith tier. We're using Golden Vow, Flame Grant Me Strength, and Blessings Boon. And lastly, we have a build for the dismounters. I decided to put these in flame art and go for a flaming strike build on both of these. Get massive fire damage on the jump attacks. And of course, these get a B in faith scaling, which is pretty phenomenal, making them perfect for a faith build. And when they're lit on fire, you're going to have over 800 AR, between 800 and 850, which isn't really bad for how much they weigh. The jump attacks do a lot of poise damage too. You can get a lot of damage as a whole out of this build. And then of course, Flaming Strike is by no means a bad Ash of War either. Out of all the ones on the list, I recommend trying out the Warped Axe build, and this build probably the most out of all of them. I really enjoyed this one. I like a lot of faith builds, of course. I love when the swords are on fire too. They look really cool. And then of course the amount of AR you get is pretty awesome, making them pretty good to just run as a faith build, go for a good amount of fire damage. And then if you want to mix in incantations as well with this one, you'd be able to do that too. By the way, if you have any build requests, be sure to comment them below. I got through a lot of them in the past couple of weeks. Probably not all of them, but a decent amount of them. I try to get around to them eventually. So if you have any, just comment below and I will add it to a list and hopefully get to them soon enough. And the dismounters are no exception. They're not a weapon I use very often, so it was cool checking them out. It was cool checking out the Warped Axe, which again, it's really surprising that I didn't have a build for that weapon. I couldn't find one that I ever made for the Warped Axe. So yeah, it was pretty cool looking at that one. Pretty cool looking at the dismounters. They're quite good as well. B and faith scaling, by the way. Second here, we're going to go over equipment, stats, everything you need to know. We have two Flame Art Dismounters, plus 25 preferably with Flaming Strike. We're using the Giant Seal. We have the Greybird set, part of the Rakshasa set on. We have the Claw Talisman, Fire Scorpion Charm, Dagger Talisman. Then we have the Shard of Alexander. And then for our tiers, we have the Flame tier and the Blood-Sucking Crack tier as well. And for stats, we have 60 Vigor, 23 Mind, 32 Endurance, 20 Strength, 16 Dexterity. We have 60 Faith, of course. These scale really well with Faith, probably about up to 60 Faith. And then we're using Golden Vow, Halaster Brewery, Blessings of the Erdtree, and Burn of Flame goes well with this too. And thanks for watching this one. Thanks for tuning in to my top 9 fun and overpowered builds in Elden Ring. A lot of these, especially the top 5 or so, are really powerful, and then some of these are a mix of fun as well. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you have any build requests, be sure to comment below. If you're not subbed and you like Elden Ring content, or you love Elden Ring content, be sure to hit that sub button as well. I'm going to be doing stuff for Dark Souls 2 and 3 coming up soon in the coming weeks. Looking forward to that. I will catch all of you guys in the next video.